What if I tell you that COVID-19 pandemic is one of the biggest lie in the history? What if the impactful occurrences of events in 2020 were just a bluff and just systematically business? I am the finance whistleblower, a professional storyteller of economical events and scams. Today we'll talk about the suspended anomaly when we're being told to stay at home and get vaccinated. The COVID-19 pandemic.
You remember where you were. March 2020. The schools closed. The offices emptied. The streets went quiet in ways they had never ever been quiet before. You stayed home. You watched the numbers. You worried about your family, your job, your savings, your future. While you were doing that, while all of us were doing that, something else was happening. Something that required your fear, your stillness, and your trust to go completely unnoticed. The largest transfer of wealth in modern American history was happening in real time. And almost nobody was watching.
To understand what happened, you need to understand what America looked like financially in February 2020. The stock market was at an all-time high. The Dow Jones sat above 29,000 points, the highest it had ever been. Unemployment was at 3.5%, the lowest in 50 years. On paper, the American economy had never looked healthier, but underneath that number was a different reality. 40% of Americans could not cover $400 emergency expenses without borrowing money. 78% of American workers were living paycheck to paycheck. Nearly 30 million Americans had no health insurance. The economy looked strong from the top. From the bottom, it was crisis away from collapse. Then on March 11, 2020, the World Health Organization declared a global pandemic, and the crisis that was always one event away arrived. What happened next was sold to the American public as an emergency relief, as a necessary intervention, as the government protecting its people. Some of it was, but a significant portion of what happened next was something else entirely. On March 27, 2020, President Trump signed the CARES Act into law. $2.2 trillion, the single largest economic relief bill in American history, passed in a matter of days, with almost no public debate. The bill included direct payments to Americans, $1,200 per adult, enhanced unemployment benefits, hospital funding, and it included the Paycheck Protection Program. $800 billion in forgivable loans to small businesses to keep their employees on payroll. These were real programs that helped real people. I want to be clear about that. Millions of Americans kept their job because of the Triple P. Millions more survived on those $1,200 paychecks. But inside the same bill, buried in a document that ran to 880 pages, written in language that required a tax lawyer to decode, was something else. A single provision, that quietly reinstated a rule that had been removed from tax code in 2017. It allowed wealthy real estate investors to claim losses from their real estate businesses against their non-real estate income, wiping out their tax obligations entirely. The Joint Committee on Taxation, a non-partisan government body, calculated the cost of single provision.
$170 billion over 10 years. Then they calculated who received it. 82% of the benefit went to Americans earning over $1 million per year. This provision was inside a bill called the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act. The bill marketed to you as a help. That was just the beginning. Between March and May of 2020, the same 8 weeks when 22 million Americans lost their jobs, American billionaires increased their collective wealth by $1.3 trillion. By the end of 2020, U.S. billionaire wealth had grown by $1.8 trillion, 25% in a single year. During a pandemic that killed over 350,000 Americans before the year was out. Let me make that specific. Jeff Bezos, founder of Amazon, made approximately $75 billion in 2020. His wealth grew faster that year than at any point at his career. The reason is not complicated. 22 million people were locked inside their homes. They needed things delivered. Amazon delivered things. Every lockdown dollar spent on Amazon was a dollar that did not go to the local store that had just closed. This is not illegal. This is not even surprising in hindsight. But it is the financial reality of what lockdown meant, depending on where you were standing when it started. What is more difficult to explain is the Paycheck Protection Program fraud. The PPP was designed to keep small businesses alive and their workers employed. It distributed $800 billion in forgivable loans, meaning you did not have to pay them back if you kept your staff on payroll. The intent was genuine. The oversight was not. The Small Business Administration, the agency responsible for overseeing the PPP, later confirmed that at least $200 billion went to fraudulent or ineligible recipients. That people received loans. Businesses that did not exist received loans. People who applied under multiple names received loans. One man in Florida received $3.9 million in PPP funds and spent it on a Lamborghini, a Rolex, and a boat. $200 billion gone from a program built for a person who owned the diner on the corner, the hair salon, the family hardware store. I want to stay with that person for a moment. The diner owner, the hair salon, the family hardware store. Between March and December 2020, approximately 110,000 restaurants permanently closed in the United States. Not temporarily, permanently. Businesses that families had spent decades building, that had served the same neighborhood for generations, gone. Meanwhile, the restaurant industry's largest companies, McDonald's, Chipotle, Domino's, saw their stock prices increase during the same period. McDonald's stock rose over 20% in 2020. Domino's rose over 30%. Because when the diner on the corner closes, people still need to eat. And the options that remain are the ones that can afford to stay open. And then there were the nurses, the grocery workers, the delivery drivers, the people who were called essential, a word that in 2020 meant you had to show up, and who received on average no hazard pay, no additional health coverage, no financial protection if they brought the virus to their homes. Essential meant necessary. It did not mean protected. It did not mean compensated. It meant we need you to keep going. And you did. And that matters more than this video can say. One more number.
Then we talk about what happened to the people responsible. The Department of Justice created a COVID-19 Fraud Enforcement Task Force in 2021. By 2024, they had charged over 3,500 individuals with pandemic fraud. They recovered approximately $1.4 billion, almost entirely small operators. The man with the Lamborghini, the person who filed under 3 names, the fraudulent shell companies. No major financial institutions faced criminal prosecution for pandemic-related misconduct. The hedge funds that profited from market volatility, no charges. The corporations that received PPP loans, they were not eligible for and did not return. Largely no consequences. The pharmaceutical companies that charged the U.S. government market prices for vaccines that the U.S. government had partially funded through Operation Warp Speed, standard business practice. Pfizer made $36.8 billion from its COVID vaccine in 2021 and 2022 combined. The federal government has contributed to the foundational research through Operation Warp Speed. Pfizer has its own funding covered by the vaccine development costs. The pricing and profit structure remains the subject of ongoing congressional inquiry. What is documented is the number. The number is $36.8 billion in 2 years. From a product developed during global emergency. Make of that what you will.
Here's what the financial record of COVID-19 pandemic actually shows. It shows a system that was already fragile, and that fragility was known. It shows that when a crisis arrives, the people with existing financial infrastructure, the corporations, the investment firms, the wealthy real estate investors, are positioned to receive public money faster and in greater quantities than the people that money was marketed as helping. It shows that $200 billion can disappear from a relief program with insufficient oversight and produce 3,500 small charges, and no structural reform. It shows that being called essential and being treated as an essential are 2 different things in America. None of this conspiracy. All of this is a public record. The CARES Act is a public document. The Joint Committee on Taxation report is a public document. The SBA Inspector General report is a public document. The Pfizer annual report is a public document. The question is not whether this has happened. The question is whether it was allowed to happen, or whether it was designed to.